Chapter 4. The air on the terrace was surprisingly chill for the beginning of summer, but a welcome relief from the warmth of the ballroom. Isabella followed Mikhail Volkov through the French doors, noticing how he positioned himself so she was never trapped between him and the stone balustrade. It was either impeccable manners or calculated reassurance, and she suspected both. The city spread before them like a carpet of stars, Atlanta's skyline glittering against the night sky. From this height, the world below seemed distant, almost theoretical. A fitting backdrop for a conversation that suddenly felt unmoored from reality. The wind tugged at her carefully styled hair, loosening a few strands that framed her face. The cold air carried the distant sounds of traffic 30 stories below, honking horns and rumbling engines reduced to a comforting urban lullaby by distance. Above them, wispy clouds scudded across the face of a waning moon, alternately revealing and concealing its silver face. "You have me at a disadvantage, Mr. Volkov," Isabella said, deciding that offense was her best defense. She fell into her courtroom stance without thinking. Shoulders squared, chin slightly raised, ready for cross-examination. Her stilettos clicked against the stone terrace as she positioned herself where she could see both him and the doors back to the ballroom. The sound echoed slightly in the open air, a percussive counterpoint to the muffled music escaping from the gala. "Mikhail, please." He leaned casually against the balustrade, the moonlight casting sharp shadows across his features. His posture was relaxed, but Isabella didn't miss the alertness in his eyes, constantly scanning their surroundings. The stone railing behind him was weathered, its once sharp edges softened by decades of Atlanta's humid summers and occasional winter freezes. He reminded her of the plainclothes security personnel who protected high-profile witnesses, permanently vigilant despite appearing at ease. "And yes, I make it my business to know when a prosecutor from the DA's office attends my events, especially one with your reputation for tenacity." Something in the way he said tenacity sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. His voice caressed the word, almost as if savoring it, like a connoisseur appreciating a rare vintage. "And do you make it your business to know all your guests' identities?" she asked, resting her hands on the stone rail, the chill seeping through her palms. The cold granite was grounding, a tangible connection to reality, as the conversation threatened to drift into something beyond her usual experience. A gust of wind swept across the terrace, carrying the distant sounds of the city up to their isolated perch. Her skin prickled with goosebumps, though she refused to show any discomfort. Her wrap was too thin for the weather. The scent of impending rain hung in the air, the slight metallic tang that preceded storms mixing with the evergreen smell that seemed to emanate from Mikhail himself. Only the interesting ones. His eyes caught the moonlight, dark and fathomless like deep water. When he smiled, the expression transformed his face from intimidating to almost boyishly charming, though the effect seemed practiced, deliberate. The sudden change was disarming, like watching a sculpture come to life. And a woman who's built her career hunting down killers that everyone else has given up on qualifies as interesting. Isabella felt exposed, as though he'd rifled through her case files. Her reputation in the DA's office was well earned. She specialized in cold cases and seemingly unsolvable murders, often finding the overlooked detail that broke things open. However, her work rarely made headlines outside of legal circles. and her deliberate avoidance of publicity made her relatively unknown to those outside the justice system. "You've done your research," she said, unable to keep the edge from her voice. The wind tugged at her hair, pulling a few more strands loose from their careful arrangement. A distant siren wailed from somewhere in the city below, rising and falling like a cry for help before fading into silence. She resisted the urge to smooth her hair back, not wanting to appear discomforted by either the elements or his scrutiny. "As have you, I imagine." He gestured elegantly toward the ballroom, where the party continued in a bubble of light and sound behind the glass doors. Through the large windows, figures moved in elegant patterns, like exotic fish in an aquarium, separated from the reality of the night air by a transparent barrier. The movement was fluid, almost hypnotic in its grace. "I doubt you're here for the canapes or the champagne tower. Though, if you're hungry, I could have something more substantial brought up. The kitchen prepared an excellent salmon that didn't make it to the buffet." Their breath formed small clouds between them in the cold air, visible evidence of life's warmth against the chill. Isabella noted that his breath seemed somehow more real than hers, thicker, as if his body heat ran differently. Another odd detail to file away in her growing catalogue of inconsistencies. Isabella considered her options, weighing the value of pretense against directness. He clearly knew why she was here, and continuing the charade would only waste time. In the courtroom, when caught off guard, she always reverted to blunt honesty, a tactic that frequently startled opponents expecting evasion. "3 women are dead, Mr. Volkov." "Mikhail," he corrected again, his voice soft but insistent, almost intimate in the darkness. His subtle accent became more pronounced with the repetition of his name, lending the syllables a musical quality that seemed to hang between them, like the lingering notes of a foreign song. "3 women are dead," she repeated, ignoring the interruption, her courtroom voice emerging. Clear, precise, uncompromising. She held her shoulders and spine as straight as she was able to. A plane blinked across the night sky far above them, red and white lights punctuating the darkness. All with identical wounds that suggest the same killer. A witness describes someone who bears a striking resemblance to you. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture, a subtle tensing that most people would have missed. Most people weren't Isabella Santos, who'd built a career on noticing such micro-expressions. The moonlight caught the momentary tightening around his eyes, a quicksilver reaction gone before it fully formed. The flicker of tension was gone so quickly, she might have imagined it, quickly replaced by his previous casual elegance. "And rather than bringing this alleged witness to identify me or obtaining a warrant, you decided to attend my charity gala in evening wear." His tone remained conversational, almost amused. But something sharp beneath the surface was a blade wrapped in velvet. His gaze traveled briefly down her dress before returning to her face. The assessment neither leering nor dismissive, but calculating. The dress rustled softly with her breathing, the expensive fabric whispering sounds against her skin. Either Atlanta's legal procedures have become remarkably civilized, or you're operating without official sanction. Isabella felt her cheeks warm, despite the chill. He'd correctly identified her unofficial investigation, which would earn her a reprimand at minimum if her boss discovered it. The flush of embarrassment annoyed her. She rarely blushed, priding herself on professional composure. Rogers had already told her to wait for more evidence before pursuing leads on the so-called claw killer. But Isabella couldn't shelve a case when she felt close to a breakthrough. Too many families had waited for justice while bureaucracy moved at its glacial pace. "I'm pursuing every available lead before formalizing any accusations," she said, maintaining her professional demeanor, despite the defensive position she found herself in. Her chin lifted slightly, a gesture of defiance she'd cultivated from childhood. "It's called due diligence." "How considerate." His slow, predatory smile transformed his aristocratic features into something more dangerous. The change was subtle, but profound, as if, for a moment, a mask had slipped. The hollows beneath his cheekbones deepened in the silvery moonlight, casting shadows that made him appear almost skull-like for a heartbeat before the impression faded. "Though I wonder if you extend the same courtesy to all your suspects, or if I'm receiving special treatment." "You're not a suspect," she said automatically, then caught herself mentally cursing her reflexive defense of legal precision. "At least not officially." "Unofficially, then." He stepped closer, and Isabella resisted the urge to step back, though every instinct screamed at her to maintain distance. The scent of him reached her, cedar and pine mixed with a muskier undertone that reminded her of autumn leaves and wild places far from the artificial confines of the city. It was oddly compelling, making her want to lean closer, even as her mind cautioned retreat. "What would you like to know, Isabella? Where was I on the nights in question? Do I have any connection to the victims? Or perhaps something more fundamental? Whether I'm capable of such violence?" How he said her name, soft, almost caressing, made her heartbeat quicken. There was danger here, but not the kind she'd anticipated. Not the threat of a cornered criminal, but something more elemental. A pull she hadn't expected to feel, like gravity shifting beneath her feet. "Let's start with the victims," she said, keeping her voice professional, despite the strange intensity building between them. She clasped her hands before her, fingers interlaced tightly enough that her knuckles whitened, a physical manifestation of her determination to maintain control. The pressure of her grip was grounding, a focal point to anchor herself against the disorienting effect of his presence. "Sarah Duncan, Jessica Morales, and Elise Carson. Did you know them?" His expression darkened slightly, something like genuine regret passing across his features. He looked away from her for the first time, his gaze moving toward the city lights. "I knew of Jessica. She worked at Blackbird Coffee on 10th Street. She made an exceptional cortado." He looked out over the city momentarily before returning his gaze to Isabella's face. A brief gust of wind lifted his hair slightly, the dark strands momentarily weightless before settling back into perfect order. Her death was unfortunate. As for the other two, the names aren't familiar to me. His answer was reasonable, but something about his phrasing caught Isabella's attention. "Knew of Jessica. Not I knew Jessica." It was the careful language of someone drawing a distinction. The hair-splitting she often encountered in depositions when witnesses wanted to acknowledge awareness without admitting connection. Sarah Duncan attended the recent opening of the hospital wing, and Elise Carson worked for an art gallery you frequented. "Ah." Mikhail inclined his head, graceful and measured, like a dancer acknowledging an audience. "I support many causes in Atlanta. That doesn't mean I know everyone who benefits from those donations." Both victims had distinctive marks on their throats, Isabella said, observing him. Her eyes never left his face, tracking every micro-expression with the intensity she usually reserved for hostile witnesses. A faint tremor ran through her fingers. Whether from the cold or the moment's tension, she couldn't tell. 3 parallel lacerations, deep enough to sever the carotid artery. Like claw marks, Mikhail supplied, his expression unreadable in the moonlight. One eyebrow arched slightly, almost challenging. The shadows across his face shifted as clouds passed over the moon, alternately revealing and concealing his features like a strobe effect in slow motion. "I've read the news reports." Isabella narrowed her eyes, a flicker of triumph igniting as she caught him in a small but significant slip. The newspapers didn't report that detail. Her voice took on the quiet intensity she used when backing a witness into a corner. Her fingertips tingled with adrenaline, the hunter's thrill of catching prey in contradiction. "We kept it out of the press deliberately." A slight smile touched his lips, transforming his face from forbidding to almost charming again. The transition was jarring, like watching someone switch masks with unsettling ease. "I have sources beyond the Atlanta Journal-Constitution." "Convenient sources," Isabella noted, "for someone with no connection to the investigation." The tension between them had shifted, becoming electric and dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with her case and everything to do with the magnetic pull she felt towards him despite her suspicions. The air between them seemed to vibrate with it, an almost tangible force. Isabella was acutely aware of how isolated they were on the terrace, the sounds of the gala muffled by the heavy glass doors. She never felt this kind of uncertainty in the courtroom. The rules were clear, the dynamics established. Here, she was navigating blind. "You suspect me because I fit a description?" Mikhail said, his voice dropping lower, drawing her into a conspiracy of two. His eyes never left hers, dark and intent in a way that made her feel simultaneously exposed and seen. "Yet, you haven't asked the most obvious question." "Which is?" She raised her chin slightly, refusing to be intimidated despite the hammering of her heart. A strand of her hair caught on her lip, and she brushed it away with deliberate casualness, a movement that belied her inattention. "Where I was when these murders occurred." He stepped closer, his movements fluid and silent, not the heavy footfalls one would expect from a man his size. The absence of sound was disquieting, unnatural. Her instincts registered the anomaly immediately. Everyone made noise when they moved, at minimum, the rustle of fabric against skin. But he advanced like a shadow, substantial yet soundless. "Aren't alibis the cornerstone of your profession, Miss Santos?" Isabella held her ground, though her instincts screamed at the proximity. Heat radiated from him, starkly contrasting the chill air surrounding them. Up close, she could see the impossibly clear texture of his skin. No pores visible, no imperfections. Not makeup, but something else. His eyelashes cast delicate shadows on his cheeks when he blinked. The movement deliberate and slow. "In my experience, alibis are often the easiest things to manufacture, Mr. Volkov." So cynical. His voice expressed appreciation rather than offense at her skepticism. He was close enough now that she could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the only indication that he might be the age he claimed. A subtle note of sandalwood mingled with his natural scent, expensive cologne applied with such restraint that it was barely perceptible, except at this intimate distance. Though I suppose that's an occupational hazard for someone who sees the worst of humanity day after day. "And what's your excuse?" The words escaped before she could stop them, challenging and unexpected. She cringed at giving control of the conversation to him. But another part, a part she usually kept carefully restrained, thrilled at the directness. His eyes widened slightly, the first genuine surprise she'd seen from him. Before he laughed, a rich, deep sound that sent an unexpected warmth through her. The laugh transformed him again, making him seem younger, more human, less the predatory creature she'd initially perceived. It reverberated in the night air, bouncing off the stone walls of the terrace before dissipating into the vastness of the sky. "Touché, Isabella." The way he said her name made it sound like it belonged to him, like he had the right to shape those syllables with his mouth. It was both intrusive and strangely thrilling. "You're not what I expected when I saw your name on the guest list." "And what did you expect?" She found herself genuinely curious despite her professional reasons for being there. She tilted her head slightly. The movement sent another strand of hair cascading from her chignon, brushing against her bare shoulder with feather-like contact. "Someone less." His gaze traveled over her face, lingering on her lips before returning to her eyes. The scrutiny should have felt invasive, but instead it sent a rush of heat through her body, warming her from within, despite the evening chill. The darkness of his eyes seemed to deepen, pupils dilating slightly in a way that reminded her of a cat focusing on prey. Less perceptive, less fearless, less present. The last word hung between them, loaded with a meaning she couldn't quite pass but felt in her core. Isabella was suddenly conscious of the dress Damon had convinced her to wear. The exposed skin of her shoulders and neckline prickling in the night air. The midnight blue silk clung to curves usually hidden beneath structured suits, and the neckline dipped lower than anything she'd wear to the office. Mikhail noticed her involuntary shiver and removed his jacket in one fluid motion, offering it to her without breaking eye contact. "I'm fine," she said automatically, pride making her stubborn despite the cold. She wrapped her arms around herself, refusing the gallant gesture out of some misplaced sense that accepting would cede ground in their verbal sparring. Her skin had raised in goose flesh, the tiny hairs standing at attention against the chill. "You're cold," he countered, still holding the jacket. The white of his dress shirt glowed in the moonlight, stretched across shoulders broader than his tailored clothing suggested. A thin gold chain glinted at his throat, disappearing beneath his collar, an unexpected personal detail in his otherwise impeccable presentation. The metal caught the moonlight, a brief flash of color against his skin. "And I run hot. Always have." After a moment's hesitation, Isabella allowed him to drape the jacket over her shoulders, her resistance crumbling against practical need and something else, a curiosity about this strange, unsettling man that was beginning to outweigh her caution. The jacket was warm from his body, carrying that scent she couldn't identify, something woodsy and ancient, like forest earth after rain. Its weight was comforting, the silk lining sliding smoothly against her bare skin. It enveloped her completely, the sleeves extending well past her fingertips, a tangible reminder of their physical differences. "Thank you." She pulled it closer around her, telling herself it was just for warmth. ignoring how the gesture felt strangely intimate. The fabric retained his body heat excessively, almost feverishly, as if he burned at a higher temperature than normal humans. I notice you didn't answer your question about your whereabouts. True. He leaned against the balustrade again, his white shirt almost luminous. The removal of his jacket revealed a physique that his formal wear had partially concealed. The robust build of someone who didn't just visit a gym, but lived in one. Broad shoulders tapered to a narrow waist, the formal shirt doing little to disguise the musculature beneath. I was in Chicago the evening of the first murder, speaking at a conference on urban renewal. About 500 witnesses, including the mayor of Chicago and 2 governors. The night Jessica died, I hosted a dinner party at my residence. 12 guests, including a judge, I believe you know, Samuel Whitaker. The alibis were perfect. Too perfect. Judge Whitaker was known for his unimpeachable integrity, a rare quality in Atlanta's often corrupt judicial system. If he vouched for Volkov's whereabouts, no one would question it. Isabella narrowed her gaze, not in disbelief, but in professional assessment of a well-constructed defense. I'll need to verify. Of course, he interrupted smoothly. My assistant will provide you with all the necessary details. Names, contact information, and security footage if you require it. His casual confidence suggested a man with nothing to hide or skilled at hiding everything. He gestured dismissively, as if the matter were already concluded, his hand slicing through the night air in a graceful arc. Standard procedure, I understand completely. And before you ask, I was home the evening of the most recent murder. My head of security and several other staff members can verify that for you. Isabella studied him, trying to reconcile his cooperative manner with the prickling sense of danger he exuded. Everything about him was a contradiction. Formal yet intense, helpful yet evasive, charming yet somehow threatening. Her instincts, honed through years of interviewing victims and perpetrators, sent conflicting signals. You seem very prepared for this line of questioning. When you live in the public eye, you learn to document your movements. People make accusations, file lawsuits, seek opportunities. He shrugged, the movement elegant, even in its casualness. It's a business necessity. And is that all this is to you? A business inconvenience? Isabella couldn't keep the edge from her voice. She thought of the victims, women with their lives ahead of them, now reduced to case files and autopsy photos. Her passion for justice wasn't abstract. It was fueled by the faces of those who could no longer speak for themselves. Something flickered in his eyes, a momentary darkness gone so quickly she might have imagined it. His face became serious, the charm dropping away to reveal something more challenging beneath. He looked older and wearier in that instant, as if bearing the weight of knowledge beyond his apparent years. No, Isabella, 3 women are dead. That's a tragedy, not an inconvenience. The sincerity in his voice was jarring after his practiced smoothness. For the first time, she glimpsed something raw beneath the polished surface. It made her wonder what else he concealed behind that careful facade. What experiences had shaped the man before her, with his perfect alibis and penetrating gaze? Then help me understand, she said, softening her approach. She leaned forward slightly. Her voice took on the quality that often encouraged witnesses to share more than they intended, a tone she'd spent years perfecting. The witness was particular about what she saw. red eyes, inhuman speed. She was terrified, but not confused. Mikhail was silent momentarily, his gaze moving beyond her to the city below. His profile against the night sky was striking, almost too perfect, like a statue come to life. A muscle worked in his jaw, suggesting internal debate about how much to reveal. When he spoke again, his voice was contemplative, carrying a weight of deliberation. There are things in Atlanta after dark that don't make the morning newspapers, Isabella. Things that would strain your considerable capacity for belief. Try me, she challenged, taking a step closer, drawn by the mystery in his words. Both her childhood and career had shown her the depths of human depravity. What could strain her belief after that? She'd seen ritual killings, politically motivated assassinations, murders committed for reasons so twisted they defied conventional understanding. His eyes returned to hers, intense and searching, as though weighing her readiness for some dark truth. The moonlight caught in his stormy irises, reflecting pinpoints of light that gave the unsettling impression of seeing beyond surface appearances. You're a woman who deals in evidence, in facts that can be presented in court. What if the truth isn't admissible? What if it exists beyond what 12 jurors would accept? That sounds like a convenient way to avoid answering my questions. She crossed her arms, his jacket still draped around her shoulders. The silky lining slid against her bare skin, a tactile reminder of his presence, even as she tried to maintain professional distance. Her courtroom skepticism reasserted itself, bringing the comfortable familiarity of professional doubt. I've heard similar evasions from guilty men before. A smile touched his lips. Perhaps. Or perhaps I'm trying to protect you. I don't need protection, Mr. Volkov. The words came automatically, a reflexive assertion of independence she developed early in life. She stood straighter, shedding vulnerability like an unwanted garment. Protection implied weakness, and weakness was something Isabella Santos had never allowed herself to show. The wind picked up, carrying a hint of ozone and the distant rumble of thunder. A storm approaching from the west. Mikhail, he corrected again, with a hint of exasperation. And everyone needs protection sometimes, Isabella. Even, perhaps especially, those accustomed to being the protectors. His words hit closer to home than she cared to admit. As a prosecutor, she was the one who stood between victims and their abusers, between society and those who would harm it. She wasn't used to being the one in need of protection. The suggestion that she might require it awakened a defensive pride that had propelled her through a career in a field still dominated by men. Before she could respond, he stepped closer, invading her personal space in a way that should have felt threatening, but somehow didn't. He leaned forward, his lips near her ear, his breath warm against her skin. The proximity sent a jolt of awareness through her body that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with an attraction she was increasingly struggling to deny. That woodsy primal scent enveloped her, again making her momentarily dizzy with its intensity. "Trust no one in Atlanta after dark, Mrs. Santos," he whispered, his voice dropping to a register that seemed to vibrate through her body. The warning carried an intimacy that belied their short acquaintance, as if he considered himself responsible for her safety. "Especially not your instincts. They might lead you somewhere you're not prepared to go." The cryptic warning hung between them as he drew back, his eyes holding hers for a moment longer than necessary. Something passed between them. a current of understanding, of mutual recognition that transcended the roles of investigator and suspect. Then he glanced toward the ballroom, breaking the spell. "Your assistant is looking for you." Quite anxiously, in fact. Isabella turned to see Damon standing at the French doors, his expression concerned as he scanned the terrace. The warm light from the ballroom haloed him from behind, his figure a dark silhouette against the golden glow. His usually relaxed posture was tense, one hand tapping nervously against his thigh in a rhythm she recognized as his tell when worried. When he spotted her, relief washed over his face, his shoulders visibly relaxing. When she looked back, Mikhail was already moving away, his posture relaxed as though they'd been discussing nothing more consequential than the weather. "My assistant will contact your office tomorrow with the information you requested," he said over his shoulder. The moonlight caught his profile again, highlighting the aristocratic lines of his face. "And Isabella? Be careful whose description you trust. Not everything is always what it first appears to be." With that cryptic statement, he slipped back into the gala, leaving Isabella alone in the moonlight with his jacket still warming her shoulders and his words echoing in her mind. She stood there a moment longer, trying to process the encounter, her analytical mind struggling to categorize the experience within her usual frameworks of investigation and evidence. The wind picked up, carrying the first drops of rain, fat, coal splashes that warned of the coming deluge. The distant rumble of thunder had grown closer, promising a storm that would break over Atlanta within the hour. She gathered his jacket tighter around her shoulders, inhaling that strange, compelling scent once more, before turning to join Damon at the doors. Mikhail Volkov was either the most charming innocent man she'd ever met, or the most dangerous guilty one. Either way, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just stepped into something much deeper and darker than a murder investigation. Something that existed in those spaces after dark that didn't make the morning newspapers. A world operating alongside her own, governed by rules she didn't yet understand.